Comes from the JEA curriculum. This year, in preparation for newspaper next year or yearbook next year, we're going to be looking at photography and what makes a good photo. So today we're talking about photo composition, and this is the way photo is constructed or planned. Good photos don't just happen. Sure, you might be able to take an accidental photo. That's amazing. But the best photographers keep certain elements in mind, and I want you to learn these rules before you go out and start to take photos. The first rule we'll discuss is the rule of thirds. Some cell phones, I have an Android phone and mine does this, have a setting in the camera where it will provide a 9-box grid, like a tic-tac-toe board. The rule of thirds states that if you divide your picture into a tic-tac-toe board, the subject should not be located in the center square. It should be slightly off-center. So if you notice in this picture, the Statue of Liberty is in the right corner. What that does is make it slightly off-center. It adds a little bit of interest, and it makes it look more professional. In this example, you see the main subject is way off in the corner. This definitely follows the rule of thirds. The rest of the landscape is very open. And so, just like literary terms when you're writing creative writing, just like artwork, you need to think about why you're doing what you're doing. In this case, this toddler is very small compared to the landscape. So putting him in the very corner of the picture shows his size compared to the scope of where he is. You can imagine he's running to get all his energy out. He's probably not going to make it to the end of this field without getting tired. We also are able to see that it's kind of a bleak time of year. It looks like fall maybe, possibly early spring. It definitely sets the scene. If you're doing a profile on this toddler himself, maybe a close-up would be more appropriate. If you're trying to show the scope of where he grew up, this might be a more appropriate picture. To contrast, here's a close-up of a toddler. The background in this case is faded. We can see some greenery on the trees in the background. I'm not quite sure, is it early spring? Is that winter greenery? The grass looks like it's maybe winter. What I am focused on is the toddler. I see her face, I see her curly hair, I see the details on her sweater. Definitely follows the rule of thirds. She's not in the center square at all. She's off-center, our eyes drawn to her. I also would like to note that she's facing in to the picture, which is a strategy that you generally want to communicate to the reader, the viewer of the picture. This picture also follows the rule of thirds. He's not in the center. If you notice, he's slightly looking into the center of the picture. If he was looking out, away from the picture, it would draw the reader's attention away, and we would kind of fail to notice all the other things happening. As it is now, because he's looking in, our eye is drawn to things like the lighting in the auditorium. We see the folds of the curtain. We see the scaffolding he's on. We see this really cool lighting effect shining down from the light he's fixing. So rule of thirds works well here. This also uses good lighting. It's an amazing angle because we're looking slightly up. The shadows on his face are very dramatic. Overall, a very effective photo. The next strategy is repetition. Now, you can't have a photo that contains all of these strategies. Just like artwork, just like creative writing, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. So we're learning all these different tools. Sometimes you'll combine more than one. Sometimes you'll only focus on one. Don't feel that you have to pack every single device into one photo. So this one is called repetition. This is a repeating pattern, and it helps to emphasize a subject. It also helps if you vary it just a little bit. In this example photo, obviously we have the cheerleaders. They're all expected to be doing the same thing at the same time, so there is repetition. The variety comes with their individual facial expressions, their individual appearances. It adds a little bit of interest to the shot. We can tell it's an action shot. Their legs are actually, obviously moving because they're blurry. We get the focus mostly on their faces, so their legs actually end up framing their faces. In this case, students for Halloween did an activity where they created gravestones. And so the repeating pattern of the gravestones helps to draw our eye to what's different about each one. In this case, it's the names and the faces on each gravestone. This is effective use of repetition, where we see the hands raised in the air, they're pointing, they're probably singing their school chant or their cheer. We see a little bit of variety. This person in the front is not raising his arm. He's shouting very passionately, but everyone else is. And again, the variety comes from their facial expressions. Our main focus is on the 4 people in front, but then we see the amazing scope of the entire crowd cheering. The next strategy is angle. This one requires you to change where you're standing. It makes for an interesting shot, but it doesn't mean changing the camera angle or changing the camera by tilting it. It means actually going higher or lower depending on your shot. In this case, this is a bird's eye view. No one is tilting the camera, but rather the photographer climbed up to the platform and took a picture as the student was climbing up. This is very dramatic because it emphasizes how small the spectators are in comparison to the climber, which tells us he's up pretty high. We see the look on his face is very determined. He's obviously not going to let go because he's climbing. This is the opposite. It's a worm's eye view. The camera actually got down on the ground and is looking at these 2 participants. It adds more drama. It's a more interesting shot. Note that we can still see their faces. In this case, the students are having a tricycle race, so they're riding bikes meant for toddlers. So they're obviously oversized. The students are oversized for the bikes. This photographer decided to get down on the ground and get a shot almost from a toddler point of view. So it adds a little bit of humor to the shot. We can see they're kind of smiling. Some of them look a little more serious than others, but they look like they're having fun. The angle helps to emphasize, hey, this is a fun shot. It's okay to have fun. The next strategy is called strong subject, or filling the frame. We're pretty lucky because nowadays we have relatively strong cameras that have high definition. Even most cell phone cameras are pretty high. Although if you're going to use your cell phone to take pictures for a publication, you want to make sure the resolution is able to go high enough to create high quality prints. If you're not sure, check before you take an important shot. A strong subject is something dominant, a focal point that creates a center of interest. In these types of photos, you want to keep your background simple, and that avoids distraction. The good thing about high resolution photos is they're easy to crop. So if you get a subject that doesn't necessarily fill the frame, if your resolution is high enough, you can use cropping software. Even Microsoft Word has cropping software to make a more engaging picture. So for example, this is a very strong picture taken head-on at a swim meet. The swimmer, the head, the shoulders, the arms, fills the whole frame. If the camera person didn't have a lens that was able to zoom in close enough, but they had a high resolution camera, they could take a picture from a little bit further back and then crop the picture so that this fills the whole frame. In newspaper and yearbook, if you get a shot that's too far away, you can easily crop it to get something a little bit more engaging. In this case, the close frame emphasizes the emotion on this player's face. We don't know because we don't have the caption. Did he win the game? Did he lose the game? In any case, he's being comforted or consoled or congratulated, but we see that pure emotion on his face. We didn't talk about this yet, but whoever this person is acting like a frame. Her hand and her face frames his. Okay, this one always makes everyone laugh. It's a little bit jarring, but it's a great example of a strong focus. There's no way to look at this picture and not have a reaction. I mean, you're staring into a donkey's mouth. You can see how good or bad his teeth are. You can see his eye. It's a little frightening, a little jarring, but overall it's an effective picture. The next device is framing, which we just talked about. This is using natural elements that already exist in the scene to create a frame or a border around your subject. Example, this was taken with a digital SLR camera because it is very difficult to get cell phones to do this. In this case, the blurry people, we can't really see their faces, but they're acting as a frame. They're telling the audience, this is what I want you to look at. This person here, she looks a little bit sad, contemplative, something emotional. The two people in front, we can barely tell who they are. Maybe if they're our best friends, we'd recognize them, but they're not the relevant part of this picture. She is. Again, taken with a digital SLR camera, because he's blurry. Yes, we know his number, so we could identify him, but he's not the important part of the shot. What our eyes are drawn to is the person throwing the ball, which is obviously up in the air. Number 91 here acts as a frame to draw our eye to the person throwing. In this case, really good vivid use of colors. We have a red door, which I will outline in green, and we have a red wall here that kind of emphasizes this girl who pops out with her yellow hair ties against the red. So the door literally acts as a frame in this picture. The next strategy is leading lines. These are lines in a photo that direct a viewer's focus to the subject. This is similar to framing, only instead of framing, these are lines. So in this case, we have a lot of leading lines. We have the line of drums, we have the line of the fence, we have the line of water buckets. The water being poured down on everyone act as leading lines. So essentially, our eyes are being drawn to all these people being soaked. In this picture, we have the leading lines of the lights, we have the concrete and the handrail, and then the hands themselves create leading lines. And just like the other crowd picture, it draws our eye to the magnitude of the students there. There's so many of them, they're all cheering, they're all passionate. And of course, our focus is on the 3 or 4 in the front. In this case, the leading lines are literal lines of the football field, the stands, the goalposts. She stands out against them, and so our eyes are drawn to her. This next strategy generally requires a digital SLR camera, although some cell phones can do a really good job focusing on something really close and blurring out what's in the background. You just have to practice with your phone or play around with a digital SLR. Selective focus is when a photographer narrows a depth of field so that only part of the picture is in focus, the rest of it is blurry. Even though we normally think of blurry photos as bad photos, when it's done intentionally and part of the photo is in focus, that's actually what makes a photo look very professional. Amateur photos tend to be more everything in focus rather than selective. In this case, the selective focus brings our attention to the toddler in the front. The girls in the back are blurry. It took me a while to realize there's 3 of them. There's 2 here and then there's 1 kind of laying down. We see the smiles on their faces, so we can tell they're being amused or entertained by the toddler. But the focus is not on the teenagers, it's on the toddler herself. In this slide, the baseball is out of focus. That doesn't matter. What we want to see is his face. Why is he so happy about that baseball? Did he catch it at a game? Is he going to be a star baseball player? What's important is the look on his face. This also acts as a frame. If you notice, if you do the rule of thirds, he's slightly off center. This photo uses a lot of the rules that we talked about. It's also a strong subject. His face takes up a good portion of the picture. In this case, this would be a good yearbook picture because the focus is on the model they're using to draw from. We can see that students are working on it. We see his face sort of clearly, a little bit less clearly, very blurry. The point here is the students are learning to draw. It's not a focus on individual students. It's also important to look for errors and avoid them. So the first one to avoid would be mergers. This is when two objects overlap in a strange or awkward way. They appear to be. So in this case, the cheerleader holding the D sign and the one standing to the front of her are confused. Their arms, they seem to be connected. It's not very clear whose arms are whose. It almost looks like she has 4 arms. If the photographer had maybe stepped a little bit further this way to take the shot, that probably would have been remedied. Another error would be intrusions. So this is when, like photobombing a shot, when an object intrudes on the edge of the photograph and it's unintentional. So in this case, this would be an awesome photo, but her hand and whatever's in her hand got in the way and it just detracts. It's not effective framing, it's an obvious error. Another error would be bright spots or holes. These are if the photo's kind of washed out. This brings up an important point. Digital photography is basically free. You can take hundreds of shots and you don't have to pay to develop film like they used to back in the Stone Age. So you need to take lots and lots of pictures. To get one good shot sometimes takes 100 bad shots. So don't go to cover an event for yearbook or newspaper and only take 5 shots. Take 20, take 50, take 75. When you come back, you'll go through the shots and you'll pick the best ones and delete the ones that didn't work out. You want to make sure you're taking shots from different angles, with different lighting. Experiment with flash or no flash depending on the situation. Obviously don't use flash if it's going to distract something like a play or a music performance. But you don't want to just take 3 shots and be done. That's happened several times and we're unable to use the pictures and have to send someone for additional pictures. If you're covering a one-time event, it's important that you get a good shot of it. Another error would be cropping of body parts. So this is not a good thing. We're not talking about close framing. We're talking about something that looks like it was unintentional. The photographer should have stepped back just a little bit. Again, it's always easier to crop out more things. You can't obviously put it back in. The last one are directional errors, and this I mentioned before. It's when the subject is facing the edge of the photo rather than the middle. In this case, the subject is looking away. Our eye is drawn to where he's looking. The rest of the picture might as well be irrelevant, but there's something important there.